Greetings, everyone. My name is Jeremy Smith. I'm with the Los Alamos Creative District, and we partner with a number of organizations in town to bring the On Tap series tonight, Science on Tap. History on Tap. I do want to remind everyone they can sign up for the email list from the Creative District, and I will email out each week that an On Tap is happening, information about the following ones, or you can check out our website, and we've got all four of the On Taps schedules listed there. Up next, September 21st, next Monday actually, with the Bradbury Science Museum, we're going to be hosting the Science on Tap. The speaker will be Sana Savanto with Lab's Earth System Observations Group, and the topic is going to be microbes, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So that is next week, September 21st. You can go to the Bradbury Science Museum website to register for that event. It is free, of course, but you do need to register, same as this one. And in October 5th, we've got Culture on Tap, and we are in the planning stages with Dance Arts Los Alamos to bring you that event. If you didn't catch last month's Culture on Tap, that was a fun one. It was a performing arts center, and we worked with the Los Alamos Little Theater. That recording is also available on the Creative District website, so you're welcome to go and take a look at that again. Behind the scenes guided tour, video tour of the Performing Arts Center, a little bit of history, so that was a fun one for sure. And Nature on Tap, November 2nd, and we partner with the Nature Center, Pajarito Environmental Education Center for that, and the topic is to be determined. So as soon as I know, it'll be up on the website. Once again, thanks for joining us for this History on Tap, and Amy, back to you.
Thanks. Thank you all so much for coming to History on Tap, for being here tonight. And I want to give a quick plug. If you haven't registered to come to the Historical Society lecture tomorrow night, it'll be a good one. We're starting our lecture series for the fall online. So tomorrow night, Nancy Greenspan will be opening the lecture series. She's a biographer of Klaus Fuchs, so she'll be talking about atomic espionage. So that'll be a good one. I think if you're here tonight, I think you'll enjoy tomorrow's also. That's at 6 p.m. You do need to sign up in advance, and that's at losalamoshistory.org. But tonight, really excited for History on Tap that we have Gerry Strickfaden here talking about tales of early Manhattan Engineer District, Los Alamos. So Gerry's retired from Lanel and has done some research into the Manhattan Project and the history of Los Alamos. And tonight we're sort of following the question that Gerry's posed of, was the Manhattan Engineer District prepared to operate site-wide here in Los Alamos? So with that, Gerry, I'll hand it over to you. Oh, before that, actually, I should say, usually on History on Tap, we like to have a conversation. We're going to try to have a conversation tonight also, since we have a number of us here online. We're going to do that in the chat. So as questions occur to you during the conversation, please put them in the chat and I'll read them out to Gerry, and we'll talk about things that way. So we're going to have the conversation in chat, and then I'll verbalize them so everybody can hear. Okay, Gerry, thank you.
Well, good evening. Well, just a minute, I got some mouse clicks here. Okay, to save you from looking at me, I'm going to throw up a slide from another talk. This is a map of the Southwest from about 1945. It's centered on New Mexico. I hope you can see the state lines there. And I put a green dot for every project that was built by the Albuquerque Engineer District. Let me explain what built means in the context of these districts. First off, there were a bunch of districts. Okay, the nation was tiled with districts. They're all named. Each is named for the town where the headquarters is, where the district office is. So this is the Albuquerque Engineer District, and those green dots pretty much define the boundaries of the Albuquerque Engineer District. The way they work is they responded to a requirement from what modern corporate speak would call probably a customer. but it was the using service in those days. They develop conceptual design and then acquire the land. That was sometimes a biggie, but they had a part of the district whose job was to do that. So they acquired the land, and then they engage a architect engineer to design the facility and engage a contractor, a building contractor, to build it. The core district offices were largely civilian. They had a thin crust of military officers, Army officers, but overwhelmingly the workers were civilians. Okay, now I can't advance. I bet it's this way. There. Okay, you know all this stuff. This is the title, my name, the date. And this started out to be just a list of acronyms and short nicknames so I could make my slides shorter. AED is the Albuquerque District of the Corps of Engineers. MED is the Manhattan District of the Corps of Engineers. LARS is the Los Alamos Ranch School. And this is sort of predicated on some knowledge of the ranch school. So, you know, if you have a question about the ranch school, send that to Amy on chat and we'll deal with it afterwards. Sundt refers to either the Sundt Construction Company or Eugene Sundt, one of the sons of Eugene was the superintendent for the projects. They built several of those green dots in New Mexico. And then Truslow is Lieutenant Edith Truslow, who came here as a WAC as part of the Manhattan Engineer District. And she collated and wrote the site-wide non-technical history. It's a huge tome with an enormous amount of information in it. And these are also sources. Of course, Truslow was a source. That's why she's there. Gene Sundt wrote a memoir, and you'll see some quotes from that. The Albuquerque Engineer District wrote a book, or had a book written about themselves in 1971. And there's some information for that. So this is a physics lab. So we've got to state our initial conditions. Sometime late 42, there was a decision made to build a bomb laboratory, and Oppenheimer was selected as the director. And I'm not at all happy with my state of knowledge about when and where and how those happened, but this is a date that you can find in the books. Okay, November 16th, 1942, the site was selected for the bomb laboratory. It was centered on the Los Alamos Ranch School campus in Otoe, New Mexico, and eventually they acquired about 50,000 acres. The ranch school quickly granted a right of entry, so a week later, it was legal for the Corps of Engineers to come and start doing surveys and actually start doing work. The Albuquerque Engineer District selected W.C. Kruger as the architect engineer, and M.M. Sundt was selected as the construction contractor. Then I just threw this in. In April 43, like that's when the lab started operating in the new town, the University of California finally agreed to operate the laboratory, but they made it retroactive. Okay, so the way the Albuquerque district operated, because they covered so much territory, is when there was a big project, they'd form a task force and deploy that task force to the project or close to the project. And this is the task force that started building Los Alamos. It's interesting that the other task forces usually had names like the Roswell Army Airfield Office. In this case, they changed that pattern. I think the Manhattan District got to them about security and classification. And so this task force was called the ZIA Project, which is a pretty neat name, I think. They moved, as they often did, in with the architect engineer. W.C. Kruger was located in Santa Plaza, and that's where the ZIA Project put its offices. But there wasn't enough room for all these people. There's 50 people there. So they actually had an office somewhere else in Santa Fe as well. And darn it, I haven't found it yet. So there's the ZIA Project. So how do we enter the early history? of Site Y? Well, first you go to the Oracle, Edith Truslow, but she's not a lot of help here. She says, one of the chief difficulties in securing data for this volume arose from restrictions necessarily placed by security on the early operations of the project. Many of the transactions were carried on orally to ensure secrecy, and thus no written record was preserved. In other instances, data were destroyed to further protect the secret of the bomb. This complete secrecy was one of the most amazing aspects of the entire program, but it produced one of the obstacles hardest to hurdle when attempting to piece together the story for historical purposes. Thanks, Edith. That's not very encouraging. When they started designing and letting contract, the premise was that the lab would employ, well, not the lab, the post would incorporate no more than 300 people, none of whom were dependents. And those would be distributed between Army people and lab employees. I think this went away pretty early, but that's how they started. And at a level like 300, then the ranch school campus becomes very important. There were about 50 buildings in the campus. They hadn't been surveyed yet, but it seemed likely that among those buildings would be housing for a useful fraction of those 300 people. Also, the ranch school was purchased lock, stock, and barrel, so it was fully equipped. There was a dining hall with plates and silverware and dishes in the kitchen and ready to go. There were beds and bedding. If you had a Forest Service telephone, there was a number 9 iron wire, galvanized iron wire, that you could hook up and holler loudly, and somebody at a Forest Service station in the valley would answer. That was communication in those days. There was electrical power, some, not very much, but there was some. And surprising to me, the trading post was left stocked. So the trading post that the ranch school operated. And so the Army just moved right in and started selling stuff out of the trading post. And there was water for the ranch school. And maybe if we got no more than 300 people up here. So that was not a good guess, actually. Here's a map of the Los Alamos Ranch School campus in 1937, and they had other property, but this is basically a swath between canyons in downtown Los Alamos. You can see the neat logo here, Otoe, New Mexico. I drew a big north arrow because you probably can't make up that little compass rose. And this is the standard landmark in Los Alamos, actually Pond. And I put a green circle around about Fuller Lodge, just for your orientation. So this is in it. I realize this is kind of hard to tell what's a building and what's a tree, but if you zoom in, it's really quite a nice map. Let me point out a couple of other things on here that we'll come to later. There are 4 cabins over here that I put red dots on, and there are 2 buildings that I've got blue dots on. So we'll see those again. And there were some changes between 1937, when this map was made, and 1942, when the ranch was initially utilized by the Corps of Engineers. And so notice there's an open field here with a red circle around it. We're going to see what appeared in that red circle in just a second. This is the beginning of rehabilitation of one of the ranch school buildings for use by the Corps of Engineers. The photograph was taken on almost the end of December 1942. And here you see the ZIA Project. They're organized and on the job at the end of December 1942. And I'm not sure exactly what they're doing, but this is a cabin that was built by the ranch house, presumably occupied, and was used during the war. Again, the architect engineer selected was W.C. Kruger, and a fairly obscure place I found a couple of references to the early concepts. This is called the original scope of work by Kruger. I think perhaps because it's 111 buildings, that may have been after several increases in the scope of work. But anyway, he said they were going to try to rehabilitate 31 buildings from the ranch school, construct 111 new buildings, and provide utilities and streets. And that's a pretty straightforward but complete scope of work. And then in a slightly different location, there's a sentence that I think describes how the initial concept of the laboratory came about. The boys in Berkeley, Oppenheimer, Macmillan, and Manley developed a concept. They sent that to Stone and Webster in New York City. That's exactly the process one would anticipate. Stone and Webster was selected by the Corps of Engineers when they were given the job of building the fissile material factories to be the overall architect engineer. And the original district engineer put his office in Manhattan to be close to Stone and Webster, hence the Manhattan Project. This concept, I suspect, was transmitted to Kruger, and in another fairly obscure place, we have a hint as to what it looked like. This map was labeled December 1942 Tech Area Concept. And when you compare this to what was built, by golly, it really was the concept. It's not exactly what was built, but it's really very close. And you know, like the cyclotron building down here was moved further away when they actually built it. But generally, it's a good representation of what the lab was going, what the tech area was going to become. So I pointed out 4 buildings on the 1937 map. Here are those same 4 buildings. And on this map, they're noted for demolition. Maybe you can see that they're outlined with dotted lines instead of solid lines. So yeah, this fits right into the ranch school campus. And then up here is in blue is the ice house. And over here is the Sandoval County School. And indeed, those show up on that 1937 map as well. So this is a valid concept, I believe. And once the construction got started, there were disagreements. And so here's a quote from Gene Sundt. The fact that we were often, in those early days of Los Alamos, caught between a 3-way tug of war didn't add to our good nature. The scientists thought they knew best what ought to be provided, would plan more efficiently, and above all, draft construction orders far beyond the professionals brought in for doing that particular job. And this ruffled the reserve of those highly trained specialists more than just a little. The military, and I believe here he's talking about the MED post commander and his staff. The military demanded their way and were vociferous, sometimes vindictive, and usually decisive. The Corps of Engineers, and here I think he's talking about the ZIA Project. The Corps of Engineers manfully tried to follow their orders, valiantly attempted to keep the construction moving along so as to meet the deadlines. We the Sundts, were often caught in the middle, in the melee, so often forced to make our own decisions as to how something was feasible to accomplish. Sure, we were blunt, outspoken, and quite often critical. It turns out the University of California took matters into its own hands in May, and this is only a month after they fired up in Los Alamos. May 43, fed up with the inflexibility of the Army, they began hiring construction workers. And they put them to work doing alterations, repairs, eventually additions, and eventually they grew to the point where they could build new buildings. There were 264 people working in this manner for the UC by 1944. Trouble is, this was not legal. And the War Manpower Commission stepped in. I don't exactly know what law or principle was violated, but they had to stop doing it. However, graceful recovery is that the group of construction workers was hired by the MED and became the force account. If you read Truslow, she often refers to the force account doing things here and there. And it's never completely clear what they are unless you have read this account. One of the commanders of the MED commanders of the post up here was Whitney Asbridge. He was a graduate of the Los Alamos Ranch School. Gene Sundt thought that Whitney was arrogant and not a good steward of taxpayer money, but he had some sympathy. And he said this about Whitney: "The gentleman's code that Ashbridge lived by did not envisage name callers, mischief makers, and housewives who flung hamburger on his desk, shrieking dog meat." I bet he didn't. On a trip back to Washington, he collapsed at the Amarillo airport with a damaged heart. And so they got a new post commander. This is a kind of a database slide as a change. Truslow offers some interesting graphs in her work. And one of them is what she calls the paycheck population, because they didn't count noses, they only counted paychecks. And her version is pretty complicated. I selected some points off of the Truslow graph and I replotted them in a much simpler manner. The blue curve is construction workers. And indeed, this peak up here is 3,000 construction workers. The red curve is everybody else. So it's Army civilians, and University of California employees make up the red curve. So for most of 43, you could accurately say that Los Alamos was a large construction camp with a few soldiers and scientists wandering around. There were a lot of construction workers up here. The thing that absolutely blew my mind was not this magnitude. Oh yeah, let me explain the green line. I sort of fudged. The green line denotes a couple of things that happened. One was that M.M. Sundt's original contract was supposed to expire in April. It didn't. They kept him on, but that's one reason that line is there. The other is that's when operations started the laboratory. Oppenheimer showed up. People started showing up to report for work. And so I'm sure they started pretty slowly, but that's when they started working in the laboratory. Okay, but the thing that completely blew me away about this data when I started looking at it is these construction workers were housed in Los Alamos. How could that possibly have been? You build a town for 3,000 to build a town for 300. It's kind of strange, but that's stated very explicitly in Sundt's memoir and in Truslow's report that those guys were were housed up here. Where and how? The only thing that's really explicit is these hutments that 118 were built, and they were used for housing construction workers. But if you divide 118 into 3,000, that's not a favorable ratio. So there must have been other housing up here somewhere. I'm sure they used all possible ranch school buildings. Somebody suggested tents, but somehow there was other housing up here for those 3,000 people. There also must have been messing, laundry. So it was a fairly extensive town that had to be built sort of before the real post could be built. And I think there's more there. I'm not sure exactly how to get to it, but that's kind of an interesting story. It's well known that at some point, workers were bussed up from the valley to work in Los Alamos. And I don't think that happened a lot here because it specifically says they were housed here. I do believe there was some transport back and forth, but I'm guessing something like 3 buses twice a week or something like that. So people did go home occasionally, and hopefully came back because they certainly needed the workers. But there was not a fleet of buses daily, I don't believe, doing this. Here's what things looked like at the end of the year. Sundt built 16 buildings in the tech area. Remember, his contract was extended from April through November. So this is what he did, basically the calendar year 1943. 16 buildings in the tech area, a test site. I believe that was Anchor Ranch because there's specific mention of improving the road out to Anchor Ranch. And so building a bunker out there for doing energetic tests would qualify as a test site. He also claims they built 332 apartments, and I haven't sorted this number out yet. 332 is too many to be apartment buildings, and it's too few to be just apartment units. The only thing I can think of to explain that is maybe that includes the housing he built for his construction force as well. And I don't think those were included in Truslow's accounting of structures in Los Alamos. So this might include housing for the construction workers. Dorms, barracks, an admin building, which I take to be the post headquarters, warehouses, service and mess facilities, 2 hospitals, 1 for people, 1 for horses, 2 schools. There surprised me, but yes, there was a nursery school built before Central School was built, and of course, water, sewer, and power utilities. There was another contractor up here, AOB Body, who did roads and even paved some of them. The UC Wildcatters built 2 buildings in the tech area before they were stifled, and Mountain States Telephone and Telegraph brought up 2 phone lines and a Twix line, a teletype line. Now we got serious communication. What's going on? So here's a mysterious map that I don't know everything about that I would like to. It's labeled the Project Y plot plan as of mid-August 1943. And it actually seems about right. A lot of buildings, but not too many buildings. So maybe this is what they had accomplished by the fall of 1943. Of course, north is up. Here's the north arrow. Ashley Pond. I've got a green circle around Fuller Lodge, and I've got the Sandoval County School, which became the PX for the tech area, and I've got the ice house in blue. This is not the same ice house that would have been on the 1937 map. The one in 37 was a timber structure that was replaced sometime in between by the stone structure we're familiar with. The building, the cabin, the ranch school cabin that we saw being refurbished in the photograph is right here in the red circle. But there's a big hole here. It doesn't show the tech area. I don't know why. I don't know why this map was produced. Maybe the tech area was eliminated for security reasons, but nothing says. There's no classification on the map. I hope there's more known about it. I would like to find a better copy. So I need to check with the archives, with the Historical Society archives when I can get to them. I did, however, take that 1942 tech area concept, and by rotating a little bit and changing the scale, I got these 2 buildings to match. And yep, that's where the tech area went, no surprise. What's interesting to me is the entrance in that concept drawing just matches this little driveway right here. So it kind of all hangs together, whatever it is. Okay, let me go back. What I should have said here is that lots of the buildings sort of northwest and west of the tech area and Ashley Pond were Sundt apartments. Not all of them. There are barracks, there's mess halls, there's laundries, and a few things like that. But there are a lot of apartment buildings out here that were called Sundt apartments. And what Gene says about that is interesting. It's somewhat ironical, nonetheless an irony that we were later to enjoy, that our early Sundt apartments, so vehemently castigated for their primitiveness in the beginning, were to become the community of the elite and be referred to later as Snob Hollow, due to the comfort and luxury that those lucky ones who lived there enjoyed. And that was true. Even when I was a kid, these Sundt apartments were nice apartments. You know, there was no problem at all getting a Sundt apartment assigned to you. There were 3 phases of Sundt apartments. There were 59 of these phase 1 apartments built. They were the nicest ones. They had clapboard siding, sloped roof, and hardwood floors. They got cheaper and quicker to build as the phases went along. So all the Sundt apartments were not this nice. Sometimes there are comments about this chimney. It was an amenity because remember during the war, Los Alamos was coal-fired. Everything was heated by burning coal, and so it must have gotten pretty sooty at times. This is an interesting picture from a couple of standpoints. One is just that it shows the realignment of the Main Hill Road, which was an enormous benefit to the ranch school or to the laboratory. And I'm getting to my notes. Hang on just a second here. I really do have notes. There they are. Okay, so this realignment was a momentous improvement to Site Y. Suddenly taking things to Site Y and bringing it back, I guess, became much easier and much cheaper. Truslow even calculates the reduction in square footage, cost per square foot, as a result of getting this road built. But there were other benefits as well. It allowed generators large enough to supply power for the whole project to be hauled into Los Alamos and fired up. It opened the window for busing so that buses could go back and forth and haul people from the valley without taking all day of riding in the bus. And later on, it allowed multiple runs by a fleet of water tankers down to, quote, the Espanola Valley to harvest water to bring up to the project. So water was short for the entire World War II period in Los Alamos. The other thing that I think is interesting about this photograph is, let's see, I should have pointed out the date in case you can't read it. 27 October 1943. So it's pretty late in 1943. The photograph was taken by the ZIA Project. And I find it interesting that they preserved this contextual issue, not a business issue. This was not a Corps of Engineers project. It was a State Highway Department project. I think somebody from Washington probably contacted the governor, maybe several somebodies. And so this was put to the top of the list, but it was designed by the State Highway Department and the Loudermilk Brothers Construction, you can see on the back of the shovel here, was contracted to build it. So the ZIA Project was interested enough in what was going on to take a photograph, and I'm sure you've seen other photographs, they took several at the same time, record this for posterity. The ZIA Project was gone the next year when it was paved. It was only finished to gravel in 1943. And as best I can tell, the Manhattan Project didn't even bother to take pictures of it. So shows a slight difference in perspective there. And so here's a brief summary of what went on in early 1943. Most of this talk is focused on 1943. So now we're going to transition to early 44 and see what goes on. While Sundt was still in Los Alamos, building Los Alamos, McKee was hired to build the first phase of S site. And that construction extended over the winter, and he finished in about March of 1944. The Albuquerque, well, let's see, be a little bit more complete. The University of California thought about what it would like in the housing. And so it prepared a sketch floor plan, went to the Manhattan Project office, Manhattan District office, and they passed it through the transom to the Albuquerque District. They did some research and found some prefab duplexes that sort of matched the University of California floor plan. And the Albuquerque District hired J.E. Morgan and Sons to build 23 of these prefab duplexes, which were instantly hated by the by the occupants. And so that was the last thing, the Albuquerque District up here. It was released in March, and didn't waste any time hightailing it back to Albuquerque. About that time, the labs say, wait, you know, we're not through. We're going to expand quite a lot. We need a bunch of experimental facilities. We need more people. We need more buildings. And so the Manhattan District hired R.E. McKee, the same contractor, to sort of move into town and be the resident contractor. And that persisted through the rest of the year. And so that's a quick run through. I would like to go back and mention one thing I'm remiss in not doing. Back here, when we were talking about the various organizations that were involved, I should have mentioned that Sharon Snyder has written articles and published them in the paper quite recently about M.M. Sundt and Edith Truslow. So she had already covered that quite nicely. So that's about it for me. I'll be glad to try to, if I can get away from this. There we're back. Okay, I'm ready for questions and hopefully discussion.
Yeah, we have some questions already in the chat. Thank you so much, Gerry. As other questions occur to people, please put them in the chat. We've had a nice little conversation in there. One of the questions that came up was about a photo that you shared towards the beginning of your slides, Gerry, with the task force, and wondering where that picture was taken. I don't know if you know. They're in front of that large door.
I do. Well, I know where the photo, let me tell you where the photo came from first, just because I thought that's what you initially meant. That came out of that book that I mentioned that the Albuquerque District chartered to be written. And so the photo was in there. Where the photograph was taken, those people are sitting and standing on the steps of the St. Francis Auditorium on Palace Avenue in Santa Fe. And I learned that by printing that photograph out and wandering around downtown Santa Fe looking like a dork holding up the photograph. And by golly, there it is. And not one splinter on those doors has changed since that photograph was taken.
We had some conversation about, like, where were all those construction workers living? That's a fantastic, like, just thing. So some people were saying maybe White Rock. I think that White Rock was a post-war thing. Somebody was saying maybe Totavi would be an option.
Totavi was built by the there was a camp built there by the Loudermilk Construction Company to house their workers for the highway work. And it was called Loudermilk Camp at that time. As Loudermilk sort of faded away, R.E. McKee wanted to expand Totavi, what we now call Totavi. It was called Loudermilk Camp all the way through the war and into the post-war. But at some time, Loudermilk Camp went away and Totavi was used. McKee wanted to expand Totavi and make it his construction camp for the big post-war construction boom. But the AEC superseded him and acquired the land where White Rock is. The land where White Rock is was not part of the federal reservation during the war. So, yeah, where were all those people? They must have been somewhere.
That's an amazing question, especially that, like, 3,000 people building housing for 300 people. It's like,
right.
Hang on.
Something wrong with that picture. If we had the other half of that 1943 map, I didn't mention, but it was truncated. There's a line across the map as if it was folded before it was Xeroxed, or only part of it was Xeroxed or something. If we had the eastern part of that map, that might tell us a lot about where the construction workers lived.
Yeah. There was also one of the things that you were talking about was like the number of apartment units sort of not matching up to either buildings or units. Somebody said maybe that was like units and quads. So if you were counting a quadruplex as like one unit, but it was really that could be some accounting for the numbers potentially.
That doesn't work out either. I tried that. If I don't know for sure how many Sundt two-story apartment buildings were built, but that's 4 units per building. If there were 100 built, and that looks like a credible number looking at that map. If there were 100 built, that's 400 apartments by my counting. So that's why that number seems strange.
Right, yeah. Heather's asking, what is the title of the book about the Albuquerque district, and is it available in a nearby library?
It is. I got it on the Mesa Public Library got it for me. I'm afraid of getting to my desktop for fearing screwing things up here. But I'll try. Okay. I had actually. Oops, sorry.
You're good.
I'll poke around. Why don't you ask another question and I'll.
Great. Well, I've got another sort of detailed question for you about the 1943 town site map. So what source that came from, and if there's a key to all the building numbers, because all the buildings in there are very carefully labeled.
I think my computer crashed.
Oh, well, I can still hear you and see you, so you're still here. Does it help with the looking up sources, though?
Okay, let me scroll down to that map. And come on, PowerPoint, PowerPoint. Okay, am I sharing my screen?
Not yet.
Okay, I'm going to scroll over to I've got my presentation up. I'm going to scroll over and then I'll share the screen. Okay, now I'm going to try sharing my screen.
There we go.
There, now
Perfect.
I'll go to that. Okay. I got this copy from the county. When I was chairman of the Fuller Lodge board, our staff support person brought this to me and said, I found this in the county archives. And that's all I know about it. I suspect that the Historical Society archives have a copy because a portion of this was used on the cover of one of the Historical Society books. And I meant to get it out of the library, our library, and look at what the title was. So I was handed this copy, just what you see on screen, with the title as shown, with no other information.
How interesting.
Yeah.
Area for further research, like they say.
Indeed. I was hoping somebody would jump up and say, I know where that came from.
While you have your screen shared, if we have a question about the construction worker numbers graph, or the paycheck graph, because there's like a sharp drop in the number of construction workers.
Yes, that's one of the things that gave Gene Sundt considerable heartburn. Is in a month, I guess they were told they were through, because it's reasonably consistent with when the contract was supposed to end. I guess they were told they were through, and they laid off 2,000 people. That's 2,000 people from the peak to the bottom. And then suddenly, oh no, we didn't mean that. And so he hired back 1,700. So that would have been a big issue. And Truslow's curve reflects that. This valley canyon shows up in Truslow's curve very dramatically. And so I actually did a finer measurement of her points, of her lines in that region to accurately reproduce it.
Thanks. There's another question about General Groves. So when did General Groves show up? When does he start getting involved in this story?
Let me go back to this, one of these. Maybe there's a way to do this faster, but.
This is great.
Okay. These October 42 dates, those were basically Groves opening Salvo. He was, you know, the Corps of Engineers was selected to build what they called they didn't call them fissile material, they call them factories. The factories, I think that was kind of a political term because it made it sound like they knew what they were building, which they certainly didn't. But they were really, really big and really complicated. So the Corps was completely consumed with trying to do that. As Groves got involved more and more, and I don't know whether he requested it or OSRD decided on their own, they turned operational control of the whole bomb program over to the Manhattan District. That came well after they were originally solicited to build the plants at Oak Ridge and Hanford Richland. I think that he then made a tour to look at what's going on with this program I've been handed. And he was convinced then that they needed to build a bomb laboratory. And I can think of several ways that might have happened, but it's complete speculation. And he met Oppenheimer because Oppenheimer was in charge of the fast fission project. And so he was the bomb guy. He had convened and chaired the summer studies at Berkeley to design bombs. He was the most experienced bomb designer we had. Apparently he and Groves clicked. And so the decision to build the laboratory, I think, was taken pretty quickly. And the decision to make Oppenheimer the director, I think, was taken pretty quickly as well. But there's a fair bit of speculation in there too.
All right.
Any other questions?
Yeah, there aren't any others yet in the chat.
Oh.
I'll give people a minute to put those in. Was there anything else that you that you were expecting to get in questions that you haven't gotten yet?
Well, let me see. Actually, I do have some notes here somewhere.
Oh, I do have a question if I can interrupt. Wasn't General Groves here in April of 1943 to start the laboratory?
I don't think so, but I could be wrong. I don't know. I don't think he ever stayed very long when he came here. I think he was here and took off. It's fascinating to read the books about him, his autobiography and Racing for the Bomb. He spent a lot of time on trains going from place to place. And he took a cadre of officers with him, and he'd decide to notify somebody of something. And the next station, he'd pitch off an officer with a note in his hand, and the officer would go to the telegraph office and send it, and then make his way to wherever he was going by the next train. So he didn't let any grass grow under his. So I don't know whether he was here. That's a good question. My sense is not.
Interesting. Do you know what the hutments were made of, or where they were located, and who lived in them?
Yes. Is Roger Waterman signed in here? When I was a kid, those hutments appeared all over northern New Mexico. They were sold off very early, and I'm guessing the Watermans moved a lot of those things. I was familiar with one of them that was used as the field house for the Pajarito Field Archers out on North Mesa. And I don't remember it really well, but crude immediately comes to mind. I think they were, plywood was valuable and rare. So I don't remember what the walls were. They were not triple seal. If you're familiar with World War II Army construction, some of the buildings are dark green. The reason they're dark green is they were sheathed with a material called triple seal, which is great inflation because actually we're non-sealed. but it was sheetrock wrapped in waterproof paper, and the paper was forest green, and that was the siding. Now they took some light colored goo and puttied in the joints. A lot of the buildings up here were built with triple seal. A lot of the buildings the Army built all over the world were built with triple seal. Those buildings were not. They probably had plank sides, maybe mineral felt roofs. Other than that, I don't remember.
I missed a question earlier up. That's a little a what if question. If the Los Alamos Ranch School did not exist, would Los Alamos still have been selected as this location?
My guess is no, but I can't say that for sure. I believe that the lure of the structures, the infrastructure was very strong. I guess Oppenheimer liked it as well, as, you know, chicken soup for the soul kind of reason. So between the two, I think it was very important to have the ranch school here. I think if the engineers had known what the water situation was and the degree to which the post would grow, they would never in a million years have put it here. But anyway, they did. And it's sure is a nice place.
Yeah. All right. So I think those are the questions that we've got coming on. There was one thing that you were looking up in your notes. Did you want to mention, or did we cover that?
Well, there's not very much. If you want to talk about the Corps of Engineers as a whole being selected to build the factories to make fissile material, I believe that request came about because they did such a sterling job with another huge complex project in Tennessee, the Holston High Explosive Plant, which was unprecedented in its size and complexity. They built it quickly, efficiently, and it worked. And so they had quite the track record going for them when they were selected to work on the atomic bomb project.
Yeah, fantastic. We've got some conversation going on about hutments being moved, you know, after the war. Someone moving one and using it as a tinkering area down by what's Buffalo Thunder now. A hutment that was moved just outside of the project boundaries when Los Alamos became a county, so that the original LA County courthouse could exist there in a place where people could get to without having to get through the security gate. And I'm sure that there's lots of other stories that people know about these being moved about, like you say, kind of all over the place.
I see Heather answered the question about Groves being here efficiently.
Yeah, so that is also one of those that
look at his diary. Yeah,
we can look that up. Yeah, the information exists. Yeah, great. Well, I think that those are the questions that have come in. I'll give people another little bit, but I'm gonna start saying thank you to everybody for showing. Oh,
let me say thank you to Chris Judson. She's got dates for the project management and the Oppenheimer meeting. Thank you.
Oh, great. Fantastic. Yeah, and Conant, Janet Conant in 109 East Palace, so I was saying, was mentioned as being here on April 15th of 1943. So he made one of his visits here. That makes sense that he would be here at that time. And there was a comment about a hutment on North Mesa. Could I repeat? Yeah, could you or you repeat, I guess.
Yeah. As a little kid, my dad was involved in the Pajarito Field Archers, and there was one of those hutments placed out there to, hold targets and supplies and stuff like that. So that was my close encounter with a hutment.
Got it. All right. Well, thank you so much. This has been so interesting. There's always, there's always so much in the Manhattan Project to get into, and I think this had some new information for a lot of us. So Thank you very much, Gerry. Thank you all so much for coming tonight. There's more, on taps. There's creative on tap, or the Creative District is doing all sorts of on taps that Jeremy mentioned at the beginning. So you can keep track by going to the Creative District's website. You can keep track of what the Historical Society is doing by going to our website as well. So thank you all for coming, and have an excellent evening.
Let me say goodbye to all the people I know.
Yeah.
Well, and the ones I don't know, but thank you for attending. And I enjoyed putting this together. This was we got a Oak Ridger there. I see Ray Smith, by golly. So anyway, I enjoyed putting this together. I enjoyed the research.
Fantastic.
So long.
Thank you all.